Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future with your host, Alan Pentz. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do. Introducing your host, Alan Pentz.
Hey, welcome to AI and Government Podcast. Today we have a very special episode, an all Corner Alliance episode, no guests. So with me, I have two amazing leaders at Corner Alliance. First is Max Romanik, who is one of our account managers over DHS and over at the IRS, and then Marc Leh, who's working on the commerce side with us. So welcome to the pod, guys. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having us, Alan. Good to be here.
So today we wanted to go a little internal and talk about how we're seeing AI play out amongst clients. And, you know, some clients we can talk about what they're doing. Some we have to kind of anonymize them based on their current efforts and how public they are. But rest assured, almost all clients in the federal government, at least thinking about AI. So let's start on the R&D side. Max, you were talking a little bit about how you see it playing out. Talk about how you're seeing AI specifically in R&D.
Yeah, absolutely. In the DHS space, we've got sort of current efforts that are being developed right now, and then there's the future-looking efforts where there's some appetite and a little bit of an unclear development path. On the current efforts, it's a real big push towards trying to figure out how to do things like integrate unattended sensors into modern operations, and a lot of that has to do with looking at very large data sets and trying to figure out where there's pattern recognition. For example, say an unattended sensor looking for wildfire. What is the pattern of information that a sensor is going to be feeding you that equals fire instead of a campfire in a reasonable campground that's totally under control? Can we try to look at the way that those things are developing, the environmental factors, the geographic factors, to say one is a concerning beginning of a forest fire, the other is a family camping. And so that's certainly an area of focus. And then once you take that data set and you've identified it as fire, can you bring it into more of an integration platform, taking in other forms of information like weather information, that sort of thing, to help advance prepare for a response, placement of assets, and then hopefully shorten the time from identification of an incident to being able to put boots on the ground and have a response to something like that. And that's a trend, I think, that's sort of cutting across anything that has to do with climate change response, because we're definitely seeing a modification and an update to emergency response models as a result of climate change, with those events happening more frequently and at greater magnitude. Something has to change. And I think they're looking at this correctly by saying, well, one of the earliest interventions we can make is by looking at technology interventions and figuring out how that can increase and enhance our ability to respond, keep our citizens safe, and keep our responders safe. So that's one of the big areas where we're seeing AI now. Where I think it's starting to get a little bit concerning is that you also have people, state and local level, that the federal government is trying to support. They've made these big purchases in AI, wanting to stay up with the current, the modern, be on that cutting edge, but there's not been a unified strategy for how a lot of those acquisitions are happening. And now they're finding themselves in a situation where, how do we have governance? How do we manage this portfolio of IT projects that we now have that have all of these capabilities, but they're sort of one-offs. And so until they unify them into more of an integrated response pattern, there's a little bit of panic now where money has been spent and now they're not quite sure how to best leverage it. And so that's another space where I've seen our federal government clients really looking to try to figure out, how can we support our state and locals? Can we provide policy and governance models for them to replicate? That way they can make the technology buy, but then how to use it and deploy it. They've got the entire force of the federal government behind them, giving them guidance on that. And so I think that's an exciting opportunity that's at its infancy, hasn't really developed yet. And I'm sort of excited to see where that goes.
It's interesting, yeah, because on the DHS side, I guess you have, I mean, not 100% unique, but sort of unique that they work across state and local, and then a lot of federal functions as well. And it's sort of like a lot of the work we did back with public safety communications, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's sort of like purchasing different systems. How do they interoperate? How do we govern this? And so you get a lot of silos of information sitting out there.
That's exactly it. And trying to find out, like, where do you insert? Do you support at the local level? Do you support at the state level? Is it something you want to provide to them? Is that something you want to just advise them on how to acquire that sort of thing? And it's exactly what you're talking about, Alan, with the sort of things that we ran into at PSCR. I think it's replicating. It's just a new technology set that's even more capable than what we were looking at in the past when we were running up against these same hurdles.
So Mark, you're doing a lot of work on CHIPS Act and other kind of advanced communications and technology. So what are you saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think artificial intelligence and machine learning, algorithms and just analytical performance improvements applied to, I guess, the design, development, and operations of hardware and software systems related to communications and computing. You're looking at AI capabilities being applied at various segments of that kind of supply chain, whether it's higher performance tools that can model certain components of a wireless network, of a semiconductor manufacturing process, and being able to model different iterations and design choices more quickly, evaluating performance trade-offs by using certain robotics or certain design choices or process choices over others. I think the level of precision you have with testing and confirming viability of emerging products, whether it's a new cell phone, new critical infrastructure such as IoT enabled, sensor enabled, traffic management system, or things of that nature within kind of a smart city use case has been big. And then just trying to bring some sort of automation to a lot of industries that haven't traditionally been expected to be communications or computing service providers. Automotive is a classic example of having to outfit a navigation system or obstacle avoidance system within a vehicle with hundreds of semiconductors and localization sensors that all need to be integrated. Data needs to be standardized so that the onboard data processing engine and cloud-based server can operate with the speed necessary to make sure that your car is telling you where things are. So yeah, I mean, I think that applying artificial intelligence and machine learning in general, like analytic innovations to hardware components and network systems that haven't traditionally been automated to this degree is kind of the macro trend that I see.
So really on your side, Mark, you're focused on where the government really shines in both cases here is you're working with industry to try to take an existing technology, move it to a new area where it can help, or innovate a new technology that can, perform one of these functions that you talked about in the area targeted, with you chips and advanced communications. And so really it's kind of, I think a lot of people don't perceive the government being as involved in the R&D side and don't see that every day. And then for you, Max, it's really on the, hey, let's help state and locals or, in other cases, other parts of the federal government, their response capabilities. How do they take advantage of these commercial technologies that like people that Mark's working with might be developing and apply them to novel situations? And so it's an area where I think the government shines because it's really them helping other people. And that's obviously their mission, but they're not necessarily implementing AI internally to the organization. So that really brings down the risk of internal, data leaks and all those kind of things that people are worried about. But it really promotes the private sector and state and local sectors' adoption of these technologies. So I guess from your perspective, how, like, say, maybe starting with you, Mark, like, how does the government figure out exactly where they need to get involved? Because obviously commercial sector is doing a bunch of stuff itself, right? Sam Altman's out raising $7 trillion from the Saudis or whatever he's doing. So like, why does the government need to be involved at all?
So I typically have two angles for recommending government, support of industry competitiveness, broad technology innovation. One would be kind of, I don't want to say speculative, but high risk, high reward, fundamental research that can be, proving the viability of a technology that is receiving skepticism from industry, or industry is having difficulty demonstrating cost effectiveness or technical viability of integrating a new, AI machine learning algorithm into, cloud data management stack. Being able to dedicate federal researchers, extramural performers to solving those problems that industry has identified. Is one kind of long-term R&D capability, given that a federal agency just doesn't have the same kind of shareholder pressure to demonstrate, profitability, quarter over quarter that a growing, tech company would. The other would be honestly focusing federal R&D capabilities, whether it's applied to artificial intelligence or other emerging technologies, on the elements of the technology sector that are non-competitive or almost utilitarian. So, and bringing some level of standardization or best practices to those points of non-competitive differentiation. So thinking through these hardware manufacturers, wireless carriers, they have proprietary information that gives them a competitive edge related to how are we going to design our network to deliver the best user experience to our wireless customers? How are we going to develop a new chipset architecture that delivers speed and thermal properties that will allow this high performance computing engine to operate within a commercial airliner and withstand the extremes of those operating conditions. That is something that industry is never going to want to share with government and anybody else. But if there are kind of a lowest common denominator of these are common challenges associated with the entire sector, and you can build some sort of a consensus or coalition around this is a problem that we're all experiencing. It's not a point of competitive differentiation for us or any other firm. And it could benefit from, standardization or a little bit more open communication around developing kind of a common accepted approach to mitigating those challenges. So things like, what is the expected latency between when I speak and when Alan speaks on this podcast? And, what are some of those baseline performance metrics that AI equipped vocal encoder or something needs to perform at for this podcast platform to work? Yeah, I would say long-term or non-sensitive common denominators of, elements that industries are struggling with.
And Max, what about on the more state and local side?
I don't see it as distinct necessarily from what Mark was saying. I think all of those factors are at play. I think you just get a situation where some of the pragmatic realities of where our federal government clients and where their state and local stakeholders sit. Some of these functions, I think, really do demonstrate that good role for government, like you're talking about, Alan. Our state and local customers, they frequently don't have the ability to do a bunch of research into what is the best AI capability that they want to add for their operations. And that's where, a federal agency can come in and do some of that upfront research, craft the policy guidance, and then help our state and locals make that purchase decision, knowing that there's been the sort of vetting of that piece of technology. I think that's a really important function that they do on behalf of those folks. And in addition to that, they also set up mechanisms to help purchase those things through grant programs, that have the allowable expenditures against that grant program. That's another way of sort of guiding and steering the direction that R&D should happen. And then there's another function here where some of the things that our state and locals are engaged in, you have an open question on should market forces really be driving that sort of innovation. If you have a company that's got some interesting AI to help an evacuation mission, they don't have competitors yet. It's out at the bleeding edge. And so you don't want to have market forces be, well, this group of people could afford that capability. They were able to safely evacuate their homes, but then this community couldn't afford it and they lost everything. Until there's multiple competitors and you see a thriving marketplace, I think it's okay to have some government support of those industries in service of keeping an entire community safe. Once you have multiple evacuation AI products, great, let market forces compete and get the right price and the cool feature set and everybody wins. But until that happens, I think there's really a strong role for government here. And then it makes it so that you are immunizing a little bit against, DHS just does pilots. They don't actually have these programs that last, and there's no O&M afterwards. That's an accusation that's been leveled at them for years. I know that they're actively trying to combat that reputation. I'm certainly seeing it with our clients and the work that they're doing, where they're trying to build these things to last, not just be a really cool proof of concept. The sponsored research and proof of concepts are great for driving innovation in industry, but whether or not that then makes it all the way through to a purchasable product that our state and locals and our citizens can get the benefit of, that's where the open question remains. And I think that AI is going to be one of the first use cases where they really take that head on and start combating that perspective, and using their position in the marketplace to stabilize, to drive innovation, and to make sure that these capabilities are delivered to our citizens. And then once there's a thriving marketplace around it, then I think they'll be able to step back and let the market do its thing.
It's really about maybe not building something. It's more about trying to use existing commercial trends or products. And then, a huge role the government plays, I don't think people realize, is just like acting as a collator of all the requirements of these different players, right? So even on the industry side, where there are different associations, they might not come together in different ways. Government can convene and allow them to express, their take. And then particularly on the state and local side, you just think it's a very dispersed, difficult market. If you're a startup or even a relatively large company, to be able to sell across 56 states and territories and God knows how many cities and counties and all that stuff, it's just an incredible feat. There are whole companies that basically they're just a sales force that happen to make a technology, right? So that some companies we might have dealt with in the past, but this is a huge challenge, and people wonder, hey, why does my city not have this, or why did this thing fall down? Well, it's because of this huge dispersed market. So the government really can act as a collator of, hey, I'm going to bring together states and locals of small municipalities, large, big rural states, populous states, and help them get their needs put into these technologies. I think it's a massive role.
And Alan, like in relation to that, so I'm a big believer, AI is certainly a hype term right now, and analytical based decision making and technical operations has been around for a long time. But even the most, innovative emerging AI tools still kind of follow a consistent analytical workflow. The tool is only going to be as effective as its fit for use, its configuration, its execution by like a educated or capable operator, and iteration. So like you're running an analytical model, you're getting results. A human has to be able to evaluate whether or not these are effective, relevant, and informed decision making. And I think that if you think about defining problems to solve, evaluating data sets that are high quality, that could inform analytical processes at scale, because that's what we're talking about with AI or ML, and then providing the testing, evaluation, and validation services, like are these analytical tools executing or producing results? There are roles for the government across that workflow. I've seen Department of Commerce and NIST gain a lot of traction by basically managing data sets that can be analyzed by AI and machine learning algorithms, whether by designing prize challenges or competitions that are open to the public to see who can kind of develop the most innovative solution based on wireless propagation data, using publicly available census data to identify ways to develop LiDAR maps or have better ingress-egress routes for emergency services within different cities. So I think being kind of a objective provider of the utilities needed to develop AI machine learning capabilities is a perfect role for government.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mark. You're looking at a situation like in the public safety space. The government is that perfect entity to sit the middle. It's really hard for public safety to speak with a single voice because there's tens of thousands of public safety entities in every state. How do you get all of that to speak with a unified voice? You want to get requirements from FEMA, you can go to FEMA. You want to get requirements for local law enforcement. I mean, you're talking about tens of thousands of different agencies, and do they all see the world the same way? Absolutely not. So combined with, where do you get your requirements from so that industry is building something that these folks actually need. Great place for government to insert itself. And then also from that training perspective that you were just talking about, Mark, if you're dealing with a public safety answering point, 911 center in New York City, yeah, they might have enough of their own internal data to train some AI model to perform a function. But if you're dealing with a public safety answering point in a place with far less population, that doesn't have nearly the funding level or staff that like a major municipality is going to have, they probably don't have access to that sort of stuff. And those disparate outcomes of like, well, you have to live in New York City if you want all the cool hotness. And if you live in rural America, you're just left out in the dark. That can't be. That just can't be the way that it is. And so you see a lot of government programs designed at trying to level the playing field, create those training data sets and solicit the requirements so that though New York might be providing a lot of the inputs for a system like that, the entire sector benefits from the outputs with government intervention.
And I think, Alan, I know this is a topic you're passionate about around, providing those accessible components of an analytical workflow to the community. And you can put proper safeguards and monitor who's using them and follow up with people to build kind of a community, but it's not restricting innovation that's going to be driven by the private sector. You're providing tools that can be embedded within solutions that are, emerging or already in the market, rather than prescribing specific do's and don'ts to the industry that moves very quickly. So I feel passionately about that positioning as well.
I also think we had this thing, like, what was it, 8 years ago, where everything was about big data, right? And the government data sets, and we had data.gov and still have all that stuff, right? But it kind of feels like the real importance of that is just emerging now. And the government has so many, we call them treasures in the attic, right? There's so many data sets across the government that could be hugely valuable to, all sorts of technology providers and people and companies and institutions, right? And so I see a huge role of the government just getting this data out there. One of the problems in AI is getting enough data to train on. So there's a huge role in that. And I also see, this is totally speculative on my part, but we worry about AIs being accurate or using, garbage in, garbage out on the data. Like, I could see a role where you get like an NSF or NIST or somebody, they start releasing sort of model data sets where they could say, hey, we've vetted this is accurate to this amount, right? And so you can always compare your model against this and see how accurate it is, right? So they can become these reference data sets that help people determine and accuracy.
Yeah, the prototypical models, I think you can apply it to the application level. So, hey, I want to develop an analytical output that determines the likelihood of certain health outcomes based on, individual behavior. And that's like a common use case that different biomedical research agencies at the federal and private sector use over and over again. Yeah, like, a NIST, a NIH could certainly certify this is kind of the prototype that, defines how you're treating, input variables and other parameters that produce outcomes that can be, justified in the future. But I could also see developing kind of subcomponents of models as well. But yeah, referencing, certification, providing or curating high quality data that people can use in whatever way they see fit is great. And also developing cybersecurity standards and safeguards or abstraction schemes to allow for different levels of sensitivity data to be, managed by the government and maybe selectively made available to, technology providers to inform the development of new products.
Yeah, and don't forget about data cleaning too, because they have these historic assets that people have frequently either long forgotten about or there's now new use cases for. But these data sets, they have bias inherent to them because of the way that they were collected or built back in the day. This was not the use case that was in mind when these things were built, or they perfectly reflect a sector or a space that we've now changed the way we operate. And so, the bias is there in the data, It'd be really nice to train on some of these models, but you have to clean and sanitize the data set. Otherwise, the AI model is just going to inherit the implicit bias that exists in the data set. Well, that's now a new function for government. They own these assets. They don't have to negotiate them somewhere else, but they can go back through and re-examine some of that stuff and see if they can clean and sanitize those data sets to make them useful for AI training. There's a treasure trove of that sitting in government servers that is an untapped resource. We just have to figure out how to best deploy it. And then you get to expand the field of training data. And that's really one of the big precious commodities in this space is how are you going to provide that information to train it up on? I think that there's all sorts of opportunity for government to re-examine some of that stuff and go, hey, we've got 100 years, 50 years of law enforcement data, but we have this problem with it. And we now need some assistance on how to remove certain elements or to recharacterize certain elements so that a AI doesn't hallucinate or get the wrong idea about what that data means. Huge opportunities there to really do some interesting stuff. And I think it's right in line with what you're talking about, Mark. It's just it's another function and another feature of what can happen in this sort of environment.
If Reddit's worth $60 million a year, the federal government's got a lot more than that. So, to me, it's a national asset, really. That very few other nations are going to have that level and scale of data in that kind of history, right? So, moving to probably a little bit more of the danger zone for government, right? No, not the danger zone, I guess I'm being exaggerating, but internal use, right? So, first, really is internal efficiency. And this is where I think we haven't seen quite as much adoption. I think it's largely going to be driven, well, I'll throw this to you guys, but it strikes me that a lot of the use of AI internally is going to be done through platforms like ServiceNow and Salesforce and stuff like that. Microsoft, things that the government's already using that are FedRAMPed, and then those products will incorporate AI capabilities. So, Max, I know you're doing some stuff with IRS right now. What are you seeing on the internal adoption side?
Our IRS clients have call centers for public outreach, just like you would expect. We're in tax filing season right now. That's going to mean a lot of people are calling the IRS for questions around how to file their returns. And so they're running a call center. And, we get a lot of lessons from private industry around how to drive efficiencies in a call center. And so they're really interested in things like chat bots and live assistants. And these are great areas where AI can really help increase the volume of calls that a call center can address, helping to provide higher degrees of accuracy, better quality in providing services to our citizens who have questions regarding how to file their taxes and that sort of thing. And so we're seeing a lot of success with that client and how they're rolling out those sort of programs. It's a constant area of improvement and upgrade and adding new capabilities and new features on an ongoing basis. It becomes, sort of one part traditional IT management program, one part, this new capability introduction, and then making sure that the training for staff is in place and that all of the, interoperability considerations and governance is in place for how you manage one of these new technology sets. This is a great area where private sector is way out ahead. And so government gets to go to school on those lessons learned in the private sector. We've had these experiences in private industry for a long time, and we're getting better at talking to robots and having robots answer questions for us. You don't need consciousness necessarily to be incredibly intelligent, and I think we're starting to calibrate and refine where that can really provide a good level of service. So, government is definitely planting its flag on this map, recognizing that they have equities here. And I think the way that these things are being rolled out, it's good now, and I think it's only going to be improving as we go forward.
I mean, I see the weakness here, or the place where I'd like to see the government push a little harder is using, building models internally, so let's use open source and start building some, obviously worry about the security, go through that. But how can we take the data we've got and start using it in a more effective way? Certainly, I think, on the customer service side and things like that, the CX side, that's going to get there because of the platforms that they're using. people are going to be using things like ServiceNow and Salesforce, and those things are going to have those capabilities. So I don't worry too much about the use there. But I know, I just feel like there are these agencies that have so much internal data that if they could just plug it in, you think about just the grants we do and all the data associated with that, just the massive reams of paper and the nervousness that there is out there in using that and putting it into AI is it's like this thing in the government where there's this just paralysis of fear because any screw up is going to get jumped on. And any real step forward that you take in innovation in that way internally is, you're going to get a pat on the back, but it's not going to rocket you to success in the federal space. So it's really it's a big contrast to me, in this R&D space where the government's working with outside actors, way out in front, on the cutting edge, helping, and I'm sure obviously in DoD and the 3-letter agencies, I'm sure things are happening we don't know about. But in the normal government, you just see this paralysis around, even post executive order from the Biden administration. They're starting to bring people in and they're starting to do pilots and experiments, but it's not getting deep into the organizations. It's pretty preliminary, and it's, quite frankly, I just think it's slow and it's a little disappointing. I don't know if you guys have any. I don't want you criticizing your clients, but it's not their fault necessarily. But it is frustrating to see the level of paralysis and fear around the technology.
I was thinking, in response to the idea, how can we use artificial intelligence or more sophisticated analytical processing to improve government operations? And two of the functions, I think of it as kind of the front and back end of a program lifecycle. Scaled requirements gathering and analysis from federal customers. So, think of ChatGPT, they're scraping the entire internet and developing kind of a cursory point of view based on the prompt that you put in. So leveraging that kind of a model to understand, who are my constituents, if you don't already know, and what do they need, and how do they perceive the products, services, and utility of our agency, and then using that to kind of update your mission and performance indicators, and use that to inform a strategy that's grounded in data. I think even developing a standardized agency specific prompts to define a mission space would be a really good kind of playbook for agencies to mirror, and iterate on and improve over time. And then I think, based on some of the program evaluation activities that I've done, the speed and efficiency that you as a federal program manager can realize by leveraging these analytical tools to quantify the return on investment of program expenditures and evaluate program outcomes in a meaningful way, and the control and customization that you could have by leveraging a suite of analytical tools is really exciting. It's not people like me poring over an Excel spreadsheet for 2 months straight, as it was even a couple of years ago. And so I think if federal agencies can develop their own approach for quantifying program impacts in a lean way. I don't want to say low effort, because I think there's a lot of upfront kind of programming and design thinking that federal agencies should do to make sure they're building an analytical evaluation capability that aligns with what they want, the story that they want to tell and how they envision impacting their constituents. But I think there's a lot of really important accountability and communication of value principles that analytics could support by evaluating federal ROI, and then publicizing those capabilities externally so that other agencies can learn from you and develop their own similar approach, I think would be really exciting as well.
I love that level of sophistication. I wish that I could even get there with some of the folks that I'm helping. I mean, I have a general optics problem that turning over these functions to a machine is just generally a bad idea, because humans are better at these things, and I don't think the data supports that position at all. I think generally the computers are way better at most of this stuff, and so where the rubber meets the road for us is that we find a willingness to turn over exceedingly hard functions to a computer. Like, how do I do inclusive messaging and access and functional needs issues in a chat bot that can talk to anybody who would call the IRS, which has the benefit of cutting across all demographics. There's no, special interest or anything. Everybody has to talk to the IRS. And so, your data set is really broad and representative. But even within a context like that, fringe and discriminated against or minority community, whatever, like those are the hard questions here. So they want to turn over the new experimental stuff to the hard questions, thinking that, well, the stuff that's more commonplace, we can let the humans do that. And it's like, it's exactly reversed. The commonplace stuff is where the computers can really help you. The AI really does know how to effectively respond and help in a situation like that. And then when you get to the hard questions, that's when it tends to provide responses that are very unsatisfactory. And so I think, there's just this optics problem, basically, of we understand this exactly in the reverse. And the answer certainly lies in what you're talking about, Mark, with the analytics and the data to be able to support the answer. But how you overcome the general position of what we're trying to do is introduce these capabilities to make everything more effective, more efficient, and allow the humans who are still involved to be way more effective in their efforts. But what they're being asked to do and what they're being told to do, by the people that control budget and their constituents and their stakeholders is literally reversed. And so that's an area where I've been spending a lot of time with our clients, trying to give them, something to fight back with and providing a really well done scientific study that shows the effectiveness of these things. It's like, I don't know what you do when reasoned, rational, logically consistent argumentation fails to meet the mark. Like that becomes a very difficult challenge.
My attitude is that humans will always be better at defining the problem to solve, configuring the overall architecture or the process for developing an analytically supported decision. And these AI machine learning tools provide the horsepower needed to make these decisions at scale and justify them and test them.
My hope is, I don't know what the unlock here is going to be, because I do think there's going to be this fear-based approach until there's an absolute mandate to use it. So then we'll go from fear of getting in trouble for using it to fear of not using it, getting in trouble for not using it. And to me, the real hopeful unlock is, having this team space in ChatGPT, Microsoft, right? That is now behind the government firewall, as I understand. Getting access to that is really key, because there's so much public. I mean, this is what I think some program managers in the government don't think through, is there's so much public information that you have that you could just put in, you could create GPTs for, right? Chatbots that are specifically answering from information that you've given it and the prompts that you put behind it. That's very easily configured now. And the capacity of that chatbot to look at that information is going up, maybe not every day, but ChatGPT was at one level, and then Google Gemini, which has a whole bunch of other problems. But the really cool thing is 1.5 had a 1 million token context window where you can upload whole books. You could upload like all the books of Dostoevsky, and it could sit there and like understand it, right? So if you're running a grant program, you can upload all the public documents, which are voluminous, right? Including the NOFOs and the grant regulations. And you can create chatbots that can answer at least internal questions, right? Like you might not want to send it out to the public yet, but you can use it and cut down, like I think what Mark's saying is like, yeah, it's a human kind of querying it and interacting, but you can cut the time to like, first of all, produce outlines, documents, all sorts of information about a program to, a couple of days to like 15 minutes. You could, particularly on the other side with Code Interpreter, the data analytics, you can just upload a spreadsheet now and you can get more analytics than, 10 McKinsey consultants working on it for, 2 months and like 10 minutes. So to me, there's just these huge unlocks, and that's where we need to see the government really take aggressive action. And a lot of it's not that risky, right? I mean, a lot of it's public information that we can just use, right? That's on the internet anyway.
It reminds me of like when we invented elevators. When they first were introduced, no one wanted to ride them because you could see out, and it scared the bejesus out of people going up these tall buildings. And the answer was, put it in an enclosed box, and then people will have faith that because they can't see what's happening around them, magically they arrive on the 25th floor and everybody's okay with it. The steel cables are there, the braking systems are there, it's all in place. But somehow when you can see out, people refuse to ride in these things. And so what is the government's answer to create the box that allows these things to operate and we get to see the benefit? Because, then 50 years later, now a windowed elevator is like a big luxury feature. And isn't it cool that we can be able to see all this stuff go up and down? But it all becomes a necessary function of now the trust is implicit that the elevator is not going to kill you as it takes you high into the sky. I think AI is the same way. It's probably not going to kill you, but we have to do something to put ourselves inside the box to give ourselves assurance that, yes, we can trust this. And then after it operates for a little while, then maybe we can strip the covers back and see it for what it really is without scaring people.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. And I think the other thing they did, right, is put an operator in the elevator, right? There's a human there operating it for you. And so that's probably they're going to hire people like us to operate it for them for a while until they're comfortable. But I do think that over time, it's going to cut out a lot of our lower level work and entry level kind of stuff and administrative stuff. And so the government's going to get huge efficiencies on the consulting side. I mean, I think our business is going to change fundamentally. I think, and all professional services firms are going to become, basically all those functions are going to be taken over by the AI, and all that sort of like outsourced, just admin, even like processing power. And really consultants are going to have to go way up the value chain, and basically many fewer people serving clients on a very, niche basis. Like you're going to be able to help, like you're going to be sitting there saying, we know how to design grant programs. We've taken all the data that the government's ever produced on it, put it in these models, and then we help you very specifically tailor it, right? That's probably what it's the level of knowledge consultants will bring in is going to have to be at such a higher level to justify continuing to pay people, because, I think the AI just takes away most of the stuff below that. I don't know, any perspective for you guys on how it'll change our industry?
I mean, I definitely think you're onto something there, where a lot of the more time intensive, less thinking intensive functions will be fully swallowed by these AIs. I do worry a little bit that extrapolating that trend generally will create, I can't think of a better expression for it, so forgive the term, but essentially a useless class. It's like the skill set doesn't match the needs of the marketplace anymore. And this is happening super fast. And so a retraining program to turn those folks into economically productive members of society again is going to lag a bit. That stuff makes me very anxious. Certainly there could be a role in government for regulating the speed at which this happens to try and smooth out that trend a little bit, but that seems counterproductive to a lot of what we're trying to do with the introduction of AI. And so it's an interesting tension for me that I like to look at, because I think that some of what you're talking about, Alan, with the trajectory that we're headed on, the functions that AI is going to perform, I don't feel like there's a ton of argument there. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And it does just open this question of like, okay, so everybody who used to have a consulting job that was, more tied to a repeating task that needed to be done at a high level of quality, what then for all of those folks? If that's now an automated function of one of these models, are all of them going to be able to elevate to this intense thinking consultant where you're looking at ways of being creative that, you can't train a model on yet? And I put a lot of emphasis on that word yet there. What happens then? Because I can't imagine that 100% of that population is going to cross the chasm and make that leap. So then what? And then the people that are already there and functioning at that high level, are they going to become these exceedingly rare and high value commodities? And how many of them do we need in order to keep that trajectory going? Where do we decide we've now landed in the promised land? I think those are all really open questions, all very interesting questions. And I think that we owe it to ourselves as government consultants to follow them closely. Our livelihoods are intimately entwined with it, but not just our livelihoods. It's all the services that our livelihoods represent going out to all the members of our country. And then this becomes a global trend real quick. So, I love it because it's such a big question and it has so many interesting facets just across the globe here. But like as many of the trends that provide that, wow, this is going to be an incredibly capable system and look at all this cool stuff we're going to do. There is a trail of, destruction maybe that might follow in its wake. And we're going to have to figure out what to do there so that we don't create some really nasty, inadvertent negative outcomes by creating all of these capabilities.
Yeah. Any take on that, Mark?
I consider AI and machine learning as a tool, an important one that everyone is going to have to learn how to use eventually. And some things, the value of these tools that I've already seen that we use at our teams at Corner Alliance is, expedited content onboarding and developing some domain specialization for folks who may be transitioning across, industries or agency like mission areas. And that's been hugely successful. And just being able to have people get up to speed more quickly so they can start building a little bit more of that literacy with the language and, terminology specific to a given industry. And that, eventually breeds credibility and allows people to grow. I think there's always going to need to be kind of a human or team involved in either designing the analytical processes that automate functions or defining what functions do we need to automate and why, and how is this going to benefit the organization. And then, someone has to be executing or monitoring the performance of these, AI algorithms or analytical processes, and reviewing or somehow acknowledging the data outputs or whatever the output is of these processes and bringing it back to impacting an organization or influencing decisions. So I think it's important to become familiar and competent with understanding how these tools work, how you can begin leveraging them to increase your own productivity. And that makes for a much more elegant transition into kind of a more AI-centric workplace.
Yeah.
So I think, it's a tool. You got to get to know it and use it to your advantage. And the humans will maintain their presence in the loop for a lot of the services that we currently provide. It's just going to be automating a lot of those heavy labor-intensive functions and allow people for higher order, more strategic thinking.
I use like two analogies. One being what people used to maintain paper spreadsheets, right, before Excel, and there were hundreds of people just sitting in rooms like copying stuff, right? And then Excel came, and like there are probably fewer. There are not people doing the copying, but I mean, unemployment didn't go anywhere; it went down, and people just moved to higher level analytic tasks using creating Excel and using the outputs. So it's somewhere between that and maybe like the horse and buggy industry that just basically doesn't exist except as like an antique, right? And so obviously that those people are gone, and there wasn't really a higher level thing to go to. I guess car making, but it didn't seem like that sort of shift was really what was happening. Maybe I'm wrong, but it didn't seem like that.
I mean, maybe the buggy manufacturer became a really good upholsterer in the car factory. You hope. The scary version of this, though, would be that the data entry specialist that used to feed the model, maybe becoming a software engineer is a harder and less transferable sort of skill set there. I hope that what's underlying what you're talking about is correct, which is that the AI will create new jobs and new opportunities we're unaware of now, and those actually will be something that the people whose jobs go away can actually move into. Please, I want you to be right.
Well, I think of it this way too. It's like, think about all the times you were like, oh, that would make a really good app. And like, you don't have, you're not going to go pay a bunch of offshore people or onshore. That's incredibly expensive. And like, it's so hard to manage it. And you don't know enough about software to like know how to do it. And you're just going to pour money down a hole. And now you're just going to be able to be like, all right. So to me, that's the unlock of like I think about it like at a grant program we do a lot of, right? Is all that setup work that we do, a lot of that'll just go away because the AI can do it. It can create the base documents, it can take like the legislation and say, here are the issues that we need to deal with. And then we can use a big data set to like recreate the next program. But my thing is, what if we start getting real-time data about grant implementation? We are able to write into grants like a little more flexibility to respond based on the data. Now, maybe our role is to come in and say, look, this is what we're finding real time. And we're seeing it displayed real time, like we're getting this, that, and the other thing, but not what we thought. And we can make these tweaks and changes, and like everything can, and so there's still going to be that human judgment about how to do that. But it's just like, our brains are going to be used on the highest level task of changing this program on the fly to make it so much more effective for the purpose that it was set out for, versus spending all this time on sort of the admin and setup, right? And to me, that's probably where it goes for now. And then eventually there'll come a time, and that does mean fewer people involved in it, but the level of value provided will escalate, go 10, 100 times. But to say that the AI will just do it and know how to do it itself, and I think we're a long way. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. I appreciate you guys staying on a little longer. And just in the future, Max and Mark are going to be helping me explore these issues and helping to host the pod. So probably not all three of us interviewing one person. That seems like a little excessive, but probably taking turns. So, and we'll probably just do a few episodes over time, just checking back in amongst the three of us. What are we learning? What are we seeing out there in the federal landscape? But for now, that was awesome, guys. And I really appreciate you being on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alan. We're really excited to be joining you, and there's lots and lots of additional content to uncover here. So pleased to be joining the cadre.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Alan. Looking forward to it. And we'll talk to you all soon.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.